The year is 1803. The ink of the Louisiana Purchase was barely dry, yet the most crucial maps of the newly acquired territory were still blank, held hostage by rumor, myth, and the fearsome vastness of the American interior. The fate of a burgeoning republic, poised to stretch from the Atlantic to the rumored Great Western Sea, rested on the shoulders of two men: the legendary Merthyr Lewis and the audacious but largely forgotten surveyor who was meant to meet him. This is not the story of the Corps of Discovery you know. This is the story of Elijah Thorne, a man haunted by a secret commission, a brilliant cartographer whose name was scrubbed from the official records, and whose discoveries, had they been made public, would have altered the course of American expansion, and perhaps its very soul. The President's Handshake. The air in the library at Monticello was thick with the scent of aged parchment, coal smoke, and the faint citrusy perfume of 1,000 pressed flowers. Outside, the Albemarle County hills lay blanketed in an unseasonal late March drizzle. President Thomas Jefferson, tall and slightly stooped, his face a roadmap of intellectual rigor and political toil, offered Elijah Thorne a cup of weak tea. "Mr. Thorne," the president said, his voice a quiet, persuasive baritone, "you believe in the rational mind, do you not? In the power of precise observation over inherited superstition?" Elijah, barely 30, but possessing the sharp, restless eyes of a man who had already mapped more of the eastern Appalachians than any other, took a careful sip. He wore the practical, durable clothing of a field man, a stark contrast to the president's refined silk waistcoat. "Sir, I believe that an acre of land is what the compass and the chain declare it to be, no more and no less," Elijah replied. "My maps do not permit belief, only evidence." Jefferson smiled, a fleeting expression that barely touched his eyes. "Then you are the man I need. Merthyr Lewis has his charge: to map the Missouri, find a navigable route to the Pacific, and report on the flora and fauna. His is a grand public venture. Yours, however, Mr. Thorne, is an undertaking of a different, far more sensitive nature." Jefferson moved to a heavy oak desk and unrolled a sheet of paper. It wasn't a map. It was a cryptic collection of astronomical readings, ancient French territorial claims, and a series of disturbing, almost unbelievable sketches. "This land we have purchased," Jefferson continued, resting his hand on the document, "is rumored to contain anomalies, phenomena that defy the current understanding of natural law. Our French counterparts, and before them the Spanish, gathered fragments over 2 centuries. Tales of vast petrified forests, metallic, impossible formations, and perhaps most troubling, a persistent account of a sophisticated, isolated community of indigenous peoples who possess technologies and knowledge far exceeding what is considered possible." Elijah raised an eyebrow, his professional skepticism warring with a deep, private curiosity. "Technologies, sir? What are we speaking of? Iron smelting?" "More than that," Jefferson whispered, leaning closer. "A persistent legend that the very geology of a certain isolated western range is under their control. They speak of a luminous rock that is the source of their power, and a city built of strange, dark stone. Lewis cannot waste his time chasing phantoms, but the security of this republic, Mr. Thorne, may depend on whether these phantoms are in fact real. If true, their potential threat, or their value as an ally, is incalculable." Elijah realized this was not a simple cartography commission. It was an intelligence operation, a hunt for a geographical secret that could undo the Enlightenment ideals the president held so dear, or secure the nation's future forever. "What is my specific charge, Mr. President?" Jefferson pushed a small, intricately engraved silver box across the desk. Inside lay a single, flawless magnetic compass and a delicate, highly sensitive brass sextant, both of French design, unlike anything Elijah had ever handled. "You will travel due west, following the 38th parallel as closely as the terrain permits, maintaining a southern axis to Lewis's route. Your goal is the Western Range. If the legend of the luminous rock is true, this compass will exhibit an anomalous deflection, and the sextant will reveal unusual distortion in the celestial sphere. Your maps, Mr. Thorne, will not be for the Library of Congress. They will be for this desk alone. And under no circumstances should you discover anything that defies explanation, are you to share that knowledge with anyone, including Mr. Lewis. You will chart the ghost meridian, and then you will forget you ever saw it. The weight of the secret, of charting a reality outside the known world, settled over Elijah. He knew then that the next few years would define him or destroy him. Elijah Thorne did not travel with the fanfare of the Corps of Discovery. His detachment consisted of only 4 men. Silas Rock Rooker, a taciturn, imposing man from Kentucky, a former Indian scout whose loyalty was bought with gold, and whose skill with a rifle was legendary. He had no morals, but he had an absolute sense of duty to his employer. Dr. Alistair Finch, a young, disgraced physician from Philadelphia, obsessed with natural philosophy, who carried more books than bandages. He was Elijah's intellectual counterpoint, constantly questioning the known world. Toussaint, a free man of Haitian descent, a master of languages and a former French colonial translator, whose knowledge of survival in the swampy American interior was invaluable. His silence often felt heavier than Rock's constant growl. Their mission, publicly stated, was to survey the southern boundaries of the purchase, specifically the Arkansas Territory, for potential settlement. The truth, buried deep in Elijah's field notes, was a hunt for an impossible coordinate. They left St. Louis in a small, flat-bottomed boat in late April, a month after Lewis's group. The first weeks were typical frontier hardship: blistering sun, relentless mosquitoes, and the constant, unnerving feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. Dr. Finch, meticulously recording the fauna, noted a peculiar abundance of metallic ores near the riverbanks, even in areas where the geology suggested none. "Mr. Thorne, look here," Finch called one evening, holding up a small, dark rock that glinted strangely in the firelight. "Pyrite, yes, but look at the magnetic pull. It's too strong for this meager specimen. There's an undeniable force at play, an unseen gravity pulling at the very soil." Elijah pulled out his special French compass. He placed it next to Finch's stone. The needle, instead of pointing north, began a slow, deliberate rotation, settling not on the magnetic pole, but approximately 3 degrees west of it. Elijah snatched the compass away. The needle immediately swung back to north, then hesitantly back toward the stone. "Put it away, Doctor," Elijah ordered, his voice dangerously low. "We are measuring an imaginary line, remember. We are not seeking the source of the Earth's magnetism."
But the encounter solidified their purpose. They were not chasing folklore. They were tracking a geological distortion. The ghost meridian was real. The Desert of Whispers. By the time the calendar turned to late summer, the detachment was deep within what would one day be called Oklahoma, traversing a high, arid plain that felt utterly alien to the lush, waterlogged east. The heat was unforgiving, and the water sources were few and fiercely defended by local tribes, primarily the Kansa and the Osage. Their interactions with the indigenous people were carefully managed by Toussaint, whose respectful demeanor and fluency in French Sign Language usually secured them passage. But as they pressed west, the tribes became scarce, and those they did encounter were withdrawn, their faces etched with a deep shared dread. One evening, Toussaint returned from a scouting run, his usually placid face drawn tight. "Capitaine," he said, addressing Elijah formally, "I spoke with a lone elder of the Osage. He told me we are approaching the land of the sleeping giants. He drew a boundary for me, far in the west. He says beyond that line, the wind is silent, the water is poison, and the sun does not move correctly in the sky." Elijah looked at his field notes. The elder's boundary corresponded almost exactly with the point where the French maps showed a blank space, and where his own anomalous compass readings had become permanent. The needle now rested 5 to 7 degrees west of true north, regardless of local iron deposits. They were being pulled, physically and magnetically, toward the source of the legend. The terrain changed abruptly. The familiar plains gave way to a landscape that defied rational explanation. Vast stretches of sand, dotted with jagged obsidian-like rock formations. The soil, when scraped away, was a strange reddish purple, and the local vegetation was stunted, twisted into unnatural shapes. Dr. Finch grew frantic, his scientific mind crumbling under the pressure of the unknown. "The air itself, Mr. Thorne, is different," he exclaimed one morning, holding a thermometer up. "The temperature is steady, but the density is altered. My lungs feel heavier. My barometer is useless. It fluctuates wildly for no atmospheric reason." Elijah, suppressing his own rising panic, consulted the secret compass. The deflection was now a steady 12 degrees west. They were close. Suddenly, Rock Rooker, who had been riding ahead, halted and raised a hand. His face, normally a mask of stony indifference, was pale. "Sir," he rasped, his voice barely audible, "look ahead. It's not possible." Elijah urged his horse forward. The sight that greeted them was a masterpiece of impossible geography. Rising out of the plain, like a broken tooth from a giant's jaw, was a mesa of breathtaking size. But it was not the size that stole their breath. It was the composition. The entire mesa was a uniform, crystalline black stone, perfectly smooth, reflecting the light in a way that defied natural erosion. It looked less like a mountain carved by water and wind, and more like a ruined colossal structure, built by unimaginable hands. And across its face, a sheer wall of polished obsidian, ran a seam of pure incandescent light, a slow, rhythmic, pulsating green glow. The luminous rock, the ghost meridian's center. The city of the star people. Elijah pulled out his sextant. He adjusted the mirrors, focusing on the pulsing green light, intending to get a precise coordinate. But as he did, the reflection of the midday sun in the mirror appeared distorted, smeared across the glass like wet oil paint. The sky above the mesa did not appear blue. It was a dark, bruised violet. He consulted his instruments. The compass spun wildly for a moment, then locked on to the source of the light. The deflection was now total. North was irrelevant. The luminous rock was the only pole. "We proceed on foot from here," Elijah commanded, his voice shaking with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. "Finch, secure the horses. Rock, Toussaint, prepare the rifles. If the legend is true, this is the home of the Star People, and they will not appreciate our intrusion." As they advanced, the air grew thick with a faint, high-pitched humming, like a million trapped bees. The silence Toussaint had warned about was not an absence of noise, but the absorption of it by the strange stone. They found a narrow, winding path that led up the side of the mesa. The ascent was grueling, the path almost surgically cut into the rock face. It was clearly not an animal trail, nor a simple geological fissure. Halfway up, they came to a place where the green light was intense, radiating from a massive, perfectly circular aperture in the rock. It was here that they found their first piece of incontrovertible evidence that the French legends were not only true, but understated. Resting against the rock face was a large, polished sphere of metal. It was not iron, not brass, nor silver. Elijah had never seen its like. It was lightweight, yet incredibly hard. Toussaint scraped at it with a knife, but the blade merely bent. What was most astonishing, however, was its purpose. The sphere was covered in intricate, stylized carvings. Finch, peering closely, realized what they were. "It is a mechanism, Mr. Thorne. Look, these slots, they are not ornamentation. They are for interlocking parts. It is a piece of machinery." He ran his fingers over the carvings. "And this writing, I do not recognize the characters. They are utterly alien." Before Elijah could respond, Rock Rooker raised his rifle and pointed. "Above us, gentlemen, we are not alone." Silhouetted against the dark sky at the mesa summit was a figure. Tall, slender, draped in flowing, dark cloth, and utterly motionless. It was observing them. Elijah raised his hands in a gesture of peace, but the figure made no acknowledgement. Then it turned and melted back into the shadows of the summit, leaving the four men staring at the edge of the known world. "We proceed," Elijah said, his heart pounding a rhythm against his ribs. "We must see what lies beyond the horizon of reason." They reached the summit an hour later. What they saw was not a wild, untamed wilderness. It was a civilization. Stretching across the flat expanse of the mesa's peak was a city, Xylos. It was built entirely of the same crystalline black stone, rising in graceful terrace spires and sweeping arches. There were no wooden structures, no thatch, no earthen mounds. Everything was stone, metal, and light. The streets were illuminated not by fire or oil, but by embedded veins of the same strange green glow that permeated the luminous rock. It was an impossible city, a lost testament to a knowledge that predated the Romans, the Greeks, and perhaps even the pyramids. And it was clearly inhabited. Figures, draped in dark robes, moved with a quiet, purposeful elegance along the elevated walkways. They were slightly taller than the average man, their movements economic and fluid. Elijah Thorne, the man who believed only in evidence, stood on the precipice of a discovery that would either save his young republic with unparalleled knowledge or bury it under the weight of an ancient, terrifying truth. He pulled his field notes from his jacket, his hands trembling. He had to record it. This was the Ghost Meridian.
The architecture of silence. Elijah and his detachment, having reached the summit, retreated immediately into the shadows of the mesa's edge, concealed by a cluster of unnaturally twisted, metallic-looking shrubs. "By God, look at that!" whispered Dr. Finch, tears welling in his eyes. "It defies every principle of classical and Gothic engineering. The stress points are impossibly cantilevered. The spans are too wide for the materials." Rock Ruker, the pragmatic scout, was less concerned with engineering and more with defense. He crouched low, his rifle resting on a knee. "They ain't natural, Thorne. Not the ground, not the people. We wait for darkness, then we find a way down, fast." "No," Elijah countered, gripping his spyglass. "We have to chart this. The president's orders were explicit. Confirmation is everything. We cannot leave without recording the geometry of this place." Elijah began sketching rapidly. The city, Xylos, did not conform to the grid pattern of Western civilization. Its layout seemed to be based on fluid, interlocking spirals and concentric circles, all radiating from a single point at the city's center, a towering monolith that pulsed with the deepest, most concentrated shade of green light. The inhabitants, the Star People as the Osage called them, were unlike any indigenous population Elijah had ever encountered. Their skin was the color of dark copper, their faces angular, and their heads often covered in high, sculpted wrappings, concealing much of their hair and foreheads. They moved without haste, often performing tasks Elijah could not comprehend, placing small shimmering stones into slots on the buildings, or adjusting delicate metallic structures that hummed softly. Toussaint, the multilingual interpreter, observed their movements with intense concentration. "Capitaine, they do not speak, not in the way we do. They communicate with the hands, yes, but faster than sign language. And I feel it. A vibration, not sound. A pressure in the skull." Elijah felt it too, a dull, rhythmic thrumming that seemed to bypass his ears and resonate directly in the bone. It was not threatening, merely constant, like the idle turning of a massive, silent machine. As the sun began its descent, casting impossibly long shadows across the obsidian city, the green light intensified, bathing Xylos in an ethereal luminescence. It was then, in the shifting light, that Elijah made a crucial, terrifying discovery about the construction. "Finch, look at the base of that central spire," Elijah pointed. "It isn't stone laid upon stone." Dr. Finch adjusted his spectacles, peering through the spyglass. After a moment, he gasped. "The joints, they are seamless. It is not masonry, Mr. Thorne. It is grown. A single, monolithic structure." The entire city of Xylos was one continuous, engineered growth of crystalline black material, rooted directly into the luminous rock. It was a fusion of architecture and geology, an impossible feat of material science. 6. The interruption of the guard. Their surveillance was cut short violently. A sudden, sharp crack like a dropped pane of glass shattered the humming silence. A figure in dark robes had stopped on an elevated walkway directly above their position.
It had turned its head, and even from a distance, Elijah felt the unsettling focus of its gaze. It was not looking at the bushes, but through them. The figure extended a hand toward the hiding place. A thin, silvery beam of energy, utterly silent, erupted from its calm and struck a boulder 20 yards to Elijah's right. The boulder did not shatter. It vaporized, leaving a smoking crater in the seamless black stone. "Run!" Elijah yelled, grabbing his notes and the specialized instruments. They scrambled back down the narrow carved path. The detachment was fast, driven by the stark reality of the threat. The Star People were not merely technologically advanced, they were lethally capable. Rock Rooker was the last man, covering their retreat. As they plunged into the relative safety of the shadows, Rock fired a warning shot from his rifle, a reckless, desperate move. The response was immediate. 3 more robed figures appeared at the summit. This time they did not fire energy beams. Instead, the very rock surrounding the retreating men began to sing. A terrifying high-frequency pitch emanated from the mesa, causing an excruciating pressure in their ears and skulls. "My head!" Finch screamed, clutching his temples and stumbling. "It's a sonic weapon! Keep moving!" Elijah yelled, grabbing the doctor and dragging him forward. They reached the floor of the plane just as the sonic assault peaked. The sound was unparable, a physical hammer blow. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The humming returned, distant and constant. They ran for their lives, not stopping until they were miles away. Well into the night, the impossible green glow of Xylos, a faint, terrifying beacon behind them.
The unwritten map. It took 3 days of grueling, water-rationed travel to reach a safe distance. The trauma of the escape had deeply shaken the men, particularly Dr. Finch, who suffered recurring, debilitating headaches. They set up a clandestine camp in a ravine, determined to make the most of the stolen knowledge. Elijah spread out his notes and began transferring the rough sketches to his official vellum map. He worked meticulously, detailing the coordinates, the unique geological features, and the anomalous compass deflections. The map, marked Field Designation Sector X, was a masterpiece of precise, yet unbelievable cartography. He drew the shape of the city, the spires, the spiraling layout, the monolithic construction. He used a special non-standard code to label the luminous rock and the energy weapon they had witnessed, knowing that if the map ever fell into the wrong hands, the true meaning would be lost. "We have proof," Elijah muttered, tapping the map. "Irrefutable proof of a civilization that makes us look like children carving with sharp sticks." "What now, Capitan?" Toussaint asked, nursing a wound on his arm from a fall during the escape. "We have seen them. We are alive. We return to the president with the map." "And what do you suppose President Jefferson will do with this map, Toussaint?" Elijah asked, looking up. "He will send an army. He will send Lewis's corps back with cannons. He will demand they surrender their secrets for the glory of the Republic. And what will be the result? We saw what they can do to rock. Imagine what they will do to men." The moral weight of his mission, a conflict he hadn't anticipated, crushed him. He was tasked with securing the Republic, but the very act of revealing Xylos might guarantee its destruction through aggressive overreach. Dr. Finch, his head bandaged, spoke quietly. "Their knowledge, Mr. Thorne, it's a paradigm shift. If they can control geology, if they can wield silent energy,
What if the magnetic anomaly is not a side effect, but an engineered defense? What if they are subtly controlling the environment of the entire purchase? Then the president cannot be trusted with this knowledge, Elijah concluded, the decision solidifying his fear. Not yet. We will map the rest of the 38th parallel as ordered, but Sector X must be erased. He took a second piece of parchment, a blank sheet, and carefully traced the general outline of the region, marking generic, believable landmarks, a small river, a range of sandstone hills, names that sounded credible. This would be the map he submitted to Jefferson. Then Elijah Thorne, the man who believed only in evidence, committed the greatest act of cartographic treason in American history. He took the true map, Sector X, folded it into a tiny square, encased it in wax, and hid it inside the hollow handle of his specialized French sextant. The true luminous rock and the city of Xylos became, in the official records of the young republic, merely a cluster of unremarkable high sandstone bluffs. Convergence with the core. The remainder of their journey followed the course of the Arkansas River, pushing west before turning north to avoid Spanish patrols, and to finally intersect with Lewis and Clark's expedition. The task was now agonizingly mundane after their revelation, surveying river bends, identifying edible berries, and cataloging ordinary rocks. But the memory of Xylos, the impossible city of silence, remained a raw, burning wound on their collective psyche. By the autumn of 1804, Elijah Thorne's detachment, weary and worn, finally made contact with the famed Corps of Discovery near the Mandan villages in present-day North Dakota. The meeting was tense. Captain Lewis, a meticulous and slightly severe man, was immediately suspicious of Thorne's parallel survey party. "Captain Thorne," Lewis greeted him, using the military rank Jefferson had bestowed on the surveyor for cover. "Your presence here is unexpected. We were under the impression your mandate kept you further south, in the Louisiana Territory proper." Elijah presented the sanitized map. "The terrain proved too difficult, Captain. We encountered fierce resistance from the Kansa and decided to swing north and take stock of the confluence of the Milk and Missouri. We have, however, produced a comprehensive survey of the Arkansas watershed. I trust it will be of some assistance to the President." Lewis, ever the pragmatist, immediately focused on the map's contents. He examined the details of the fictitious sandstone bluffs, the mislabeled rivers, and the deliberately imprecise coordinates. He noted the absence of the rumored Great Salt Desert or the true Rockies. "Your survey is conservative, Captain," Lewis noted, handing the map back. "It lacks the scope and detail we are obtaining. Tell me, did you observe any unusual magnetic activity in the far west? Any reports of large mineral-rich deposits?" Elijah met Lewis's sharp gaze, his face a mask of weary professionalism. "Only standard fluctuations, Captain. Iron ore in the riverbeds, nothing more. The land is vast, barren, and utterly unremarkable in its structure. I assure you, Captain, there is nothing in the far western plains that would concern the President beyond simple logistics." Lewis, ever the pragmatist, immediately focused on the map's contents. He examined the details of the fictitious sandstone bluffs, the mislabeled rivers, and the deliberately imprecise coordinates. He noted the absence of the rumored Great Salt Desert or the true Rockies. "Your survey is conservative, Captain," Lewis noted, handing the map back. "It lacks the scope and detail we are obtaining. Tell me, did you observe any unusual magnetic activity in the far west? Any reports of large mineral-rich deposits? Elijah met Lewis's sharp gaze, his face a mask of weary professionalism. Only standard fluctuations, Captain. Iron ore in the riverbeds, nothing more. The land is vast, barren, and utterly unremarkable in its structure. I assure you, Captain, there is nothing in the far western plains that would concern the President beyond simple logistics. Lewis looked disappointed, then simply nodded and turned back to his own journals. Elijah had successfully lied to the most important man in the history of American exploration. But as Elijah was packing his supplies to return east, he noticed something. Clark's servant, York, was talking quietly with Toussaint. York, a man of imposing physical presence, was whispering intensely, his eyes wide. Later that evening, Toussaint approached Elijah by the fire. "The slave, York," Toussaint began, his voice barely a breath. "He told me a story, not of what he saw, but of what he heard from the local Mandan scouts." "What did he hear, Toussaint?" "He said that far north, in the high mountains, there is a place the Mandan call the Winter Heart. A place where the sky is always visible, even at night. He said the elders whisper of a group of people who fell from the stars long ago, and now tend to a massive, circular glass structure that is buried deep beneath the ice. He said these people are white, unlike the star people we saw, but possess the same silent power." Elijah's blood ran cold. The star people of Xylos, the luminous rock, were not a singular anomaly. There was another, equally impossible civilization dwelling in the extreme north. His carefully protected secret was only half the truth. The ghost meridian had a twin pole. The President's secret commission was far deeper, and the implications for the future of the Republic were far more terrifying than Elijah had ever imagined. He had to get the true map back to Virginia, and he had to convince the President not only to keep the secret, but to investigate the terrifying unknown northern twin.
The deception of the return. Elijah Thorne's primary objective shifted from surveying the West to securing the silence of his own small party and ensuring the survival of the true map. The journey back from the Mandan villages in late 1804 was an internal siege. Dr. Finch, still suffering from the sonic trauma inflicted by the Xylos guards, had retreated into a deep philosophical despair. He spent his days poring over Elijah's sanitized map, constantly muttering about the sin of omission. "It's a lie, Elijah," Finch whispered one evening as they camped near the Missouri headwaters. "A glorious, comprehensive lie. We have reduced the infinite possibility of that territory to mere dirt and rock, just to protect their ignorance. What kind of scientists are we?" "We are patriots, Doctor," Elijah responded curtly, checking the concealed sextant with obsessive care. "Patriots who understand that a fire started too early consumes everything. This republic cannot afford a war against impossible technology, not yet. We are preserving the future, not denying the present." Silas Rooker, the mercenary, was the easiest to manage. His loyalty was tied to the silver he received. Elijah simply doubled his pay, demanding absolute secrecy regarding the Black City and the Green Glow. Rooker's only concern was the potential loss of his share if the secret ever surfaced.
Toussaint, however, was the greatest worry. He had witnessed the most, understood the gravity of both the Xylos discovery and the Mandan whispers of the winter heart. The star people of Xylos, they are not Christians, not of any faith I know, Toussaint remarked to Elijah one frosty morning. But they possessed control. Their city was ordered, perfect. The northern tale, the White Star people, they sound different, buried, silent, and near the ice. If they are related, Capitan, we are dealing with two sides of a hidden empire. One of the sun and stone, one of the frost and glass. Elijah recognized the profound distinction. Xylos was active, dominant, a civilization thriving. The winter heart sounded like a relic, perhaps a source, or a broken refuge. To ensure Toussaint's silence, Elijah made a risky promise. He would secure Toussaint's official freedom papers and land grant, not just the money. For Toussaint, a free man in a land still steeped in slavery, this was the ultimate bond. The four men returned to St. Louis in the spring of 1805, the unsung, unknown shadow of the Corps of Discovery. They carried the ordinary, mundane maps for the president, and the extraordinary, world-changing truth sealed inside the sextant. The Return to Monticello. Elijah Thorne arrived at Monticello in May 1805. The president greeted him with the warmth of a man receiving a major intellectual prize. Elijah laid out the public maps on the large dining room table. He spoke of the rivers, the game, the native populations, and the geological formations, all the meticulously fabricated details he had created. Jefferson listened intently, tracing the lines of the Arkansas watershed with his finger. "This is excellent work, Mr. Thorne, precise, rigorous, and practical," the president declared. "Lewis, though ambitious, often becomes distracted by the marvelous. You have given me the bedrock of the continent." Elijah knew the lie was succeeding. He then steered the conversation toward the most sensitive subject, the rumors. "Mr. President, regarding the anomalies you mentioned before my departure," Elijah said, carefully maintaining an expression of scientific disappointment. "We pressed far into the western territory of the 38th parallel. I used the specialized instruments as you instructed." He presented the French compass and sextant, which he had subtly adjusted to display only minor localized magnetic distortions, attributable to natural iron deposits. "The legends of the luminous rock and the cities of dark stone appear to be products of Spanish paranoia and indigenous folklore, sir," Elijah stated firmly. "The Western Range is primarily sandstone and granite. No impossible architecture, no controlled geology. The territory is vast, difficult, but scientifically mundane." A flicker of genuine disappointment crossed Jefferson's face. "A pity. I had hoped that the rational mind was not the only marvel in the territory. Still, the blank slate is preferable to a hostile mystery. The Republic is secure on that front." Elijah felt a cold relief. The secret was preserved. The Republic would continue its march westward, ignorant of the power that lay hidden in the desert. That night, alone in his appointed room, Elijah took the true map, Sector X, out of the sextant handle. He spread it on the desk and looked at the pulsating green lines, the spirals of Xylos, and the terrifying coordinates. He did not burn it. He couldn't. He realized the true risk was not just in revealing Xylos, but in ignoring the second, equally powerful threat whispered by the Mandan, the Winter Heart.
The Northward Whisper. Elijah requested a private, unrecorded meeting with the president 2 days later, not as a cartographer, but as a confidential advisor. "Mr. President," Elijah began, his voice low, "I told you that my survey party found nothing anomalous. That is true. But during my convergence with Lewis, I gathered unsettling intelligence from the northern tribes, confirmed by Lewis's own scout, George Drew Willard, whose findings Lewis dismissed as savage superstition." Elijah explained the Mandan and Hidatsa legends, the persistent tale of a vast, complex glass structure buried beneath the perpetually frozen mountains, controlled by a secluded population unlike any known tribe. "They call it the Winter Heart, sir, a place of endless visible sky, where the cold is contained, not natural. If we are searching for an unknown power, sir, a potential adversary or technological prize, the evidence points north, not west." He handed Jefferson a small, meticulously drawn sketch, a reproduction of the indigenous drawing Toussaint had copied from York. It showed a massive circular structure with geometric precision, half buried in snow. Jefferson studied the sketch, his intellectual curiosity reignited. He traced the lines of the impossible architecture. A city of glass beneath the ice. It is geographically plausible that two such isolated anomalies could exist in the interior, Jefferson mused. The Spanish and French records were inconclusive about the North. Lewis and Clark are focused on the Pacific Passage. They will pass near, but will not seek it. Elijah seized the opportunity. The threat is the same, sir. If this Winter Heart exists, and if it controls the cold as Xylos seems to control the geology, then it is an equally vital, equally dangerous secret. We cannot risk the public's knowledge, but we must know what lies there. Jefferson stared at the sketch for a long moment, the potential consequences of another secret expedition weighing on him. "Very well, Mr. Thorne," he finally agreed. "You have bought the Republic time. You will now chart the other extreme. This is your second and final commission. You will receive funding, a new cover story, a mission to establish northern trade routes, and new equipment. You will travel north along the Continental Divide into what we suspect is British territory, and you will find the Winter Heart. Bring back its location and its nature. But this time, Mr. Thorne, if you find an impossibility, I want to know its weakness." Elijah accepted the charge. He was now a chronicler of hidden worlds, a guardian of two secret civilizations that defined the true, uncharted scope of the Louisiana Purchase. The Northern Passage. Elijah Thorne returned to St. Louis in the summer of 1806, officially tasked with mapping the sources of the Columbia and Platte rivers. He handpicked a new, smaller, and more loyal team.
Rock-Rucker remained, his payment now tied to two separate, geographically distant secrets. Toussaint returned, bound by the promise of his freedom papers, but Dr. Finch was replaced. The trauma had made him a liability. His replacement was Miriam Locke, a self-taught botanist and surveyor from New York whose radical theories on continental drift had led her to be shunned by the academic community. She was highly intelligent, fiercely loyal to the pursuit of truth, and, crucially, utterly unaware of the Xylos secret. Elijah intended to reveal only the northern secret to her, trusting her scientific rigor to remain objective. The journey north was a grueling, uphill struggle into the vast, jagged peaks of the Rocky Mountains, the Great Divide. The atmosphere changed drastically. The dry heat of the Xylos plain was replaced by biting, unpredictable cold, even in July. As they ascended, Miriam Locke began noticing the geological peculiarities. "Mr. Thorne, the magnetic north is strong here, stronger than any mountain range I've charted," she noted, consulting her own unspecialized compass. "But look at the water runoff. It's unnaturally pure. And the ice in these peaks resists thaw in a way that suggests not just altitude, but some kind of localized thermal inversion." Elijah pulled out the specialized French compass he had brought for the Xylos mission. This time, he was not looking for a western deflection. He was looking for a northern anomaly. As they crossed a particularly high, desolate pass, the needle of the compass, instead of pointing consistently north, began to pull in strange, tight circles. Then it settled, violently, pointing not north, but directly into the ice-encrusted side of a mountain peak. The closer they got to the source of the magnetic pull, the colder the air became. Yet the paradox grew. Miriam noted the snow cover was sparse, as if the thermal exchange was suppressing the formation of new snow, but not melting the older ice. "It's a thermal anomaly, Elijah," Miriam said, shivering despite her heavy furs. "The heat is being drawn out of the air, not radiated into it. It's a localized, powerful zone of engineered cold." They had found the periphery of the winter heart. The glass dome. Following the magnetic pull, the detachment navigated through a labyrinth of frozen valleys. The vegetation was almost non-existent, replaced by strange dark lichen that glowed faintly blue in the perpetual twilight of the deep valleys. Finally, they reached a colossal sheer ice cliff. It was not glacier ice, it was a wall of polished, crystalline blue ice, perfectly smooth, utterly seamless. It was a barrier, unnatural and immense. Rock-Rucker scouted the face of the cliff. "It's too smooth to climb, Thorne, like glass, but cold enough to burn your hands." Elijah, guided by the compass, found a fissure, a narrow, barely visible seam that led into the heart of the ice wall. They followed it for an hour, the cold becoming so intense their breath froze instantly, forming sharp crystals on their clothes. When they emerged, they were standing inside a massive subterranean dome carved out of the mountain. It was the Winter Heart. The dome was enormous, filled with a crystalline light that seemed to emanate from the ceiling itself. The structure was a colossal spherical lattice of transparent material, a glass dome buried beneath the mountain, yet intact and glowing. And within the dome, beneath the protection of the crystal sphere, was a city built not of dark stone, but of shimmering, luminous white glass and polished chrome. The architecture was sharp, angled, and elegant, contrasting violently with the flowing spirals of Xylos. The structures resembled frozen sculptures, towers of impossible delicacy rising toward the glass ceiling. The inhabitants were immediately visible. They were taller than average, their skin pale, almost translucent, and their eyes a striking, unsettling shade of violet. They were dressed in tight-fitting, silver-gray garments, moving through their crystalline city with a chilling efficiency. "They are white, Miriam," Elijah whispered, remembering the Mandan legend, the star people of the north. Miriam, overcome by the sight, dropped her field glasses. "This is the source of the magnetic and thermal anomaly. The entire structure is acting as a massive energy condenser. They are controlling the temperature of an entire mountain range, siphoning off the cold and storing it, perhaps, or using it to power the city." As they watched, one of the pale inhabitants approached a large angular pylon near the city center. The figure touched the pylon with its hand. Immediately, a wave of visible, shimmering cold flowed outwards. Then, a small patch of frozen vegetation near the wall, which had started to sprout green, instantly became brittle and shattered. They were looking at a terrifying, controlled power, the manipulation of thermal energy on a continental scale. If Xylos was the power of fire and earth, the winter heart was the power of ice and stillness. Elijah pulled out his notebook, his hand shaking violently from the cold and the sheer terror of documenting a second impossible civilization. He knew then that the secret of the Louisiana Purchase was not just land and resources, but a guardianship of two ancient opposing forces hidden in the heart of the continent.
The Sentinels of Stillness. Elijah, Miriam, Rock, and Toussaint pressed deeper into the subterranean dome of the winter heart. The air inside, though bitterly cold, was eerily still and carried a sterile metallic tang. The crystalline city, bathed in the soft internal light, felt like a mausoleum of impossible science. They moved along elevated walkways of polished white glass, their boots crunching silently. The inhabitants, the pale star people, were visible everywhere, yet they appeared strangely preoccupied. They did not interact socially. Rather, they moved with a precise, almost robotic determination between the angled structures. They appeared to be maintenance workers of a colossal humming mechanism. "They are entirely self-absorbed, Elijah," Miriam whispered, her breath misting into thick ice crystals. "They don't seem to notice us, or perhaps they simply don't care. They treat their environment as an extension of themselves." Toussaint pointed to a large rectangular panel on the wall of a tower. A figure in silver garments was interacting with it. The panel was covered in glyphs similar to, yet distinct from, the mechanical symbols Elijah had seen in Xylos. The Xylos star people communicated silently, with pressure, Toussaint recalled. These seem to communicate with the city itself. They are adjusting the flow, the heat, the power. Elijah pulled out his special sextant. He realized the distortion was not just magnetic. The extreme cold was interfering with atmospheric refraction, subtly altering the perceived location of the stars, even underground. The star people of the winter heart were manipulating the very laws of physics to maintain their environment. Rock Rooker, always focused on security, noticed a disturbing detail. "Thorn, look at their faces. They are not old, but they are not young.
They are all exactly the same. No expression, no change. Indeed, the faces of the pale inhabitants were unsettlingly uniform, devoid of the lines of age, fear, or joy. They seemed to exist outside the normal cycle of human emotion and mortality. Elijah knew they couldn't risk a confrontation. They needed to find the source of the thermal anomaly, the control center. Guided by the increasingly erratic compass, which now seemed to be seeking a negative pole, they followed a broad avenue toward the center of the crystalline city. The central engine. The avenue terminated at a massive sunken plaza. At its center rested the core of the winter heart, a gigantic spinning torus of dull, metallic chrome. It was rotating slowly, perfectly silently, suspended within a shimmering field of pure, intense blue light. The blue light radiated an overwhelming sensation of cold that was palpable, yet not physically freezing. It was the source of the engineered cold, the colossal engine maintaining the impossible underground climate. "That is the thermal regulator," Miriam breathed, her scientific excitement overcoming her fear. "It is generating or storing or perhaps reversing absolute zero. It is the heart of their power." As they watched, a procession of the pale inhabitants moved toward the torus. They raised their hands, and the blue light intensified, causing a sudden, sharp drop in the ambient temperature that made their very bones ache. The entire structure of the glass city seemed to hum in response. Elijah realized his critical mission: to find the weakness. "Miriam, can that thing be stopped? What is its vulnerability?" Elijah urged. Miriam pulled out a small specialized metal coil she used for geological assays. She held it near the blue light, then drew back sharply. "It's a resonance chamber, Elijah. The field is held together by an incredibly precise, incredibly high frequency. If the frequency were disrupted, if the resonant wave was broken, the entire system would collapse. The stored thermal energy, the cold, would likely dissipate catastrophically." She then pointed to a small, raised console near the edge of the plaza, guarded by two immobile, silent figures. "That console, I believe, is the frequency modulator, the control mechanism." As Miriam spoke, one of the pale figures, perhaps a supervisor, stepped away from the central torus and turned its violet eyes directly toward their hiding place behind a crystal archway. There was no sound, no beam of energy, but the air around the detachment thickened instantly, pressing on their chests, making it impossible to breathe. It was a silent, suffocating force, an engineered pressure field, similar to the weapon used in Xylos, but deployed with chilling precision. "We've been seen," Rock gasped, raising his rifle, but the pressure was too much. His arm sagged. Elijah reacted instantly. He pulled a heavy, solid bronze surveying weight from his pack, and with a desperate surge of adrenaline, hurled it directly at the figure who had fixed them in its gaze. The figure didn't flinch. The bronze weight, traveling fast and true, stopped a foot from its face, suspended in the air by the pressure field. Then, with a flick of the hand, the figure diverted the weight, sending it slamming into the crystal archway directly above them. The archway shattered with the sound of 1,000 ringing bells. The distraction, however, was enough. The pressure instantly released. "The console!" Elijah yelled. "We are going to find its weakness." The sabotage.
They broke cover, running low across the plaza toward the frequency modulator console. The pale inhabitants began to move toward them, not running, but gliding with unnerving speed. Rock Ruker, despite his exhaustion, proved invaluable. He fired 2 warning shots at the floor of the plaza, which successfully stopped the immediate advance of the closest figures. The sound of the gunfire, amplified by the dome, was deafening. Miriam reached the console first. It was a complex array of shimmering glass knobs and metal switches. She frantically analyzed the glyphs, relying on her knowledge of mathematical sequencing and energy flow. "I need to reverse the frequency. I need to interrupt the thermal current," she shouted over the ringing in her ears. Elijah, standing guard, fought a figure who was attempting to subdue him with a non-lethal, paralyzing beam of cold. The beam struck his arm, and the skin instantly numbed, turning a dangerous white. "Hurry, Miriam, I can't hold them." Toussaint, recalling the silent communication from Xylos, made a desperate attempt. He began making sharp, rhythmic clicking noises with his tongue, attempting to overload or mimic the silent frequency of the star people. It was a futile gesture, but it bought Miriam crucial seconds. Miriam slammed her hand down on a series of 3 glass studs in sequence. An amber light flashed on the console. "I've broken the synchronization," she yelled. "The resonant frequency is disrupted. Get ready." The moment she broke the sequence, the silent humming of the winter heart ceased. The blue light surrounding the central torus flared violently, turning a brilliant sickly yellow, and then began to implode. The colossal engine was tearing itself apart. A terrifying tremor ripped through the subterranean city. The crystalline towers began to shudder, and hairline fractures spread rapidly across the massive glass dome overhead. The pale inhabitants, suddenly abandoning their attack, turned and rushed toward the failing core, their detached calm replaced by an agonizing urgency. "It's collapsing," Elijah screamed. "We have to get out now." They raced back the way they came, fleeing through the shattering avenues of the dying city. Behind them, the sounds of buckling glass and rending metal echoed like a mountain collapsing. They burst out of the ice fissure, back into the harsh daylight of the Rocky Mountains, just as the mountain peak above the Winterheart shuddered violently. There was no explosion, just a final, massive thud as the great glass dome buckled, and the entire section of the mountain collapsed in a silent, freezing avalanche. The magnetic anomaly vanished instantly. The compass settled, pointing true north. The Winterheart was gone, buried under a mile of ice and rock, erased from human hands. The knowledge of 2 worlds. The 4 survivors descended the mountain, forever changed. They had witnessed 2 impossible realities and destroyed one of them. Miriam Locke recorded the exact coordinates of the collapse and meticulously documented the mechanism of the thermal regulator. She noted that the star people of the North were likely a highly advanced, specialized culture, perhaps reliant entirely on their engineered environment, making them fragile and highly vulnerable to external disruption. Elijah Thorne, now carrying the true map of Xylos hidden in the sextant and the scientific schematics of the Winterheart's core, possessed the knowledge of both the fire and the ice,
the two great secrets of the Louisiana Purchase. They returned to St. Louis in early 1807. Elijah sent a coded message to President Jefferson. Northern passage secured, obstruction permanently neutralized, returning with findings. He knew Jefferson would understand. The Republic was now safe from one of its two greatest secrets. Upon their return, Elijah fulfilled his promise to Toussaint, using the remainder of his special funds to purchase the man's freedom papers and secure him a small land claim in Ohio. Toussaint, now a free man, swore an oath to take the secret to his grave. Rock Rooker, his pockets heavy with gold, simply vanished into the frontier, his loyalty bought, his silence assured by a lifetime of professional self-interest. Miriam Locke, however, presented a different problem. She was too bright, too moral, and too profoundly affected by the scientific marvel they had witnessed. Elijah, she confronted him one evening, we destroyed a civilization. We didn't study it. We eradicated it. We have the schematics of their core. We have the potential to control the climate itself. We cannot bury this. We must use this knowledge for the advancement of all mankind. The Republic, Miriam, must advance first, Elijah countered wearily. Jefferson did not ask for the advancement of mankind. He asked for the security of the American experiment. And what would the European powers do if they knew the United States controlled a technology that could shift the weather? We would be at war by sunrise. Elijah convinced her of the same moral dilemma he faced regarding Xylos. Knowledge too vast for a young republic was a weapon pointed inward. He showed her the coordinates of the still-hidden Xylos and explained the terrible power of the luminous rock. We hold two forces, Elijah told her, the power of unstoppable growth and the power of total stillness. They are too immense. They must remain secrets until the world is ready, or until the threat of Xylos forces our hand. Miriam, finally accepting the terrifying responsibility, agreed to burn her copies of the schematics and to speak only of a difficult, unsurveyable northern mountain range. She took a post as a teacher in a remote New England college, disappearing into academia, forever carrying the blueprints of a climate-controlling engine in her mind.
The Surveyor's Burden. Elijah Thorne finally returned to Monticello for the final time in the summer of 1807. He presented the president with his final report, detailed maps of the northern regions, evidence of a massive, insurmountable avalanche, and a believable account of a dangerous, uncharted region. He reported that the legendary Winter Heart had been a natural cave system destroyed by seismic activity. He then, in the absolute privacy of the Monticello Library, confessed to Jefferson that the Winter Heart had been real, and that he had been forced to destroy it to prevent the technology from falling into the hands of British or Spanish agents who were known to be active in the territory. It was a necessary amputation, Mr. Thorne, Jefferson said, his face grave. You acted with the necessary audacity. You secured the northern flank. Then Jefferson turned his attention to the true secret. And Xylos, the luminous rock? Elijah placed the true map, Sector X, on the table, detailing the spirals, the green glow, and the coordinates. It exists, Mr. President. It is an active, formidable civilization.
They possess the capacity to vaporize rock and manipulate geological matter. They are quiet, self-contained, but absolutely lethal. He explained his decision to create the false map and the danger of revealing Xylos. "If you send an army, sir," Elijah stated with unwavering conviction, "they will not find it. They will vaporize the column before they cross the 100th meridian. They are not a tribe to be converted or defeated. They are a force of nature to be avoided." Jefferson walked around the table, tracing the hidden lines of Xylos. The reality of the secret, the proof of an ancient, superior intelligence embedded in the American interior, was a heavy burden on the architect of the Republic. "We have purchased an empire, Mr. Thorne," Jefferson concluded, "and you have proven that within that empire lie two absolute truths. One that we must defend with our lives, and one that we must forget to survive." Jefferson issued his final command. "The true map will be recorded only in my personal, confidential correspondence, a cipher that no historian will ever break. Your official maps will stand. You will destroy every other copy of your notes. And, Mr. Thorne, you will officially retire. You will take a post far from the frontier, and you will never speak of the Star People again. The story of the Louisiana Purchase will remain the story of Lewis and Clark. This other chronicle ends tonight." Elijah agreed. He took a final, meticulous observation, recording the latitude and longitude of Xylos onto a tiny, microscripted piece of vellum, which he then sealed into the hilt of his favorite surveying knife, intending it as the final, untouchable contingency. He destroyed all the other physical evidence. Elijah Thorne vanished from the official records of exploration, becoming a quiet geometry professor in Massachusetts, forever guarding the two-part secret that defined the young republic: the ghost meridian, Xylos, and the winter heart, obliterated.